Do you feel like you can't move forward because you're waiting for someone to notice you, approve you, or cheer you on? That feeling, like you're stuck at a red light until somebody gives you the signal, can quietly rob you of years of progress. And here's the truth that might shock you. Nobody is actually watching you as much as you think. And that's not bad news. It's actually the best news you could ever hear. For a long time, I didn't understand that. I thought if I just worked hard enough, someone would eventually see me, tap me on the shoulder, and open the door I'd been dreaming about. I thought recognition was the missing ingredient in my life, the magic stamp of approval that would finally let me take the next step. So I kept showing up in the background, quietly hoping someone would notice my potential. But that day never came. I'd create something, but only halfway. I'd start a business idea, but then freeze because no one validated it yet. It's like I was waiting for the applause before I even got on stage. And that waiting, it drained my energy. It made me overthink. It kept me stuck in this endless loop of preparation without execution. I was living as if my worth and my next move were entirely dependent on somebody else's permission. The problem is, when you keep looking over your shoulder for approval, you miss what's right in front of you. You ignore the opportunities God has already placed in your path. I remember seasons in my life when I kept delaying my own dreams because I was secretly afraid of stepping out alone. I'd tell myself, maybe when the timing is right. Maybe when someone bigger than me says yes. And while I waited, time passed. The world moved on. My dreams sat on the shelf collecting dust. One day, I realized something that hit me hard. People aren't thinking about me nearly as much as I thought. They're not analyzing every step I take. They're not holding secret meetings about whether I should move forward or not. In reality, they're wrapped up in their own challenges, their own deadlines, their own insecurities. And if they are watching, most of the time it's fleeting. A scroll, a glance, and then they're back to their own lives. That realization was strangely freeing, because if nobody is watching closely enough to judge my every move, that means I can move without fear of their opinion. It means I don't have to wait for the perfect moment when everyone claps for me before I act. The only approval that really matters is God's, and He already called me to be fruitful, to multiply, to take what's in my hand and use it. So here's the twist. The very thing I thought was holding me back, the lack of constant recognition, was actually my greatest opportunity. It meant I could fail quietly and learn. It meant I could experiment without the pressure of the spotlight. And it meant I could grow into the person God designed me to be, without feeling like I had to perform for anyone else. If I could talk to my past self, I'd say, stop waiting for someone to open the door for you. Start building your own door. Stop standing in line for permission that's never coming. Walk in the authority you already have. Because the truth is, no one's going to care about your dream as much as you do. And that's okay. In fact, that's the gift. It means you get to care enough to act, even when no one else does. And that's the real freedom. Knowing you don't need a spotlight to move forward. You just need the courage to take the first step. Here's the truth most of us don't want to admit. The world is not thinking about you as much as you think. It's thinking about itself. This single realization can shatter years of insecurity and hesitation. Because the moment you truly understand that most people are too wrapped up in their own schedules, problems, deadlines, family matters, and even their phones to constantly analyze your every move, you'll see that you've been giving imaginary judgment way too much power over your life. Think about it. How often do you sit around replaying every move someone else makes? Probably not much, because you're focused on your own life. The same is true for everyone else. They're not holding a magnifying glass over your every action. They're too busy trying to keep their own life together. And if they do notice something you do, it's usually a passing thought, forgotten in minutes. This is exactly why Jesus' parable of the talents is so relevant here. In Matthew 25, the master gave his servants different amounts of resources before leaving on a journey. He didn't stand over them micromanaging. He didn't form a committee to clap for them before they acted. He left, fully expecting them to use what they were given, multiply it, and bring a return. The servant who acted boldly was rewarded. The servant who waited, who buried his talent out of fear, was called wicked and lazy. Why? Because he refused to move without constant supervision. God works the same way with us. He's already placed talents, ideas, opportunities, and resources in your hands, but he won't hover over you to make sure you use them. He won't gather a cheering squad before you move. He's entrusted you with something. Your responsibility is to act. The validation comes later, often after you've taken the risk and produced the fruit. And here's the danger. Waiting for a committee to approve you before you start is a trap. You'll spend your whole life thinking, maybe when they notice me, maybe when someone bigger gives me a chance. But the truth is, you may never get that kind of permission. And if you do, it'll probably be because you moved first, without it. The greatest freedom you can give yourself is to stop living as if you're under constant observation. When you stop performing for invisible spectators, you start creating for the purpose God gave you. You begin to work, build, and take risks, not because the crowd is watching, but because you're stewarding what's already in your hand. That's when growth happens. That's when God multiplies what you have. The people you think are holding you back? They're not even paying that much attention. The real limitation is in your own mind, in the belief that you need their nod before you move. Once you see that, you'll realize you've had the green light the whole time. I remember a season in my life when I kept thinking, one day, someone will see my potential. One day, a person with influence will open the door for me, and that's when my real success will begin. I was convinced that breakthrough depended on someone else's recognition. I worked hard, but with a passive mindset, always in waiting mode. I'd do enough to keep moving, but never really take bold ownership of my future, because deep inside, I was hoping for that magic moment when someone would say, "I see you. You're ready. Let's do this." I thought my role was to prove myself just enough so that the right person would finally invite me to step into a bigger stage. This waiting posture was subtle but deadly. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was outsourcing my destiny to other people's timelines. And here's the hard truth I learned. Most people are not thinking about how to advance your life. Not because they don't care, but because they're caught up in their own assignments, their own problems, their own visions. The turning point came in a quiet, almost ordinary moment. I was reflecting on why I felt stuck financially and creatively despite years of effort. I asked myself, if no one ever gave me permission, if no one ever opened a door for me, would I still be waiting? The answer shook me. Yes, I would. I had built my whole plan on someone else's initiative, not mine. That day I made a decision that changed everything. I would stop waiting for applause, recognition, or a green light from anyone else. I would start acting as if I was already qualified, already approved, and already trusted with the assignment God had placed in me. The first steps were terrifying. I started projects without telling anyone. I launched ideas without waiting for feedback. I invested time and money into things I believed in, even when nobody was there to cheer me on. I began creating, producing, and offering value without an audience. It felt like shouting into the void at first, but something incredible happened. When I stopped waiting and started moving, results came faster than I expected. Opportunities that had been invisible suddenly became visible. People who had never noticed me before began to reach out, not because I waited for them, but because I was already in motion. I realized that movement creates momentum, and momentum draws attention far more effectively than passive hoping. This is why I tell people, your breakthrough will rarely come from waiting to be discovered. It comes when you discover that God already gave you everything you need to start. The parable of the talents makes this clear. The servants weren't told exactly how to invest. They had to decide, act, and risk on their own. The master rewarded the ones who moved, not the one who played it safe and waited. When I began to operate this way, my work stopped feeling like a performance for approval. It became an act of stewardship, using what I had because it was given to me for a purpose. And here's the secret. When you work this way, without needing constant recognition, you actually become more creative, more productive, and more attractive to the opportunities you once thought you had to wait for. So now, when I'm tempted to slow down and wait for validation, I remind myself, no one is coming to open the door for you, but God has already given you the key. The only question is, are you willing to turn it? The mental trap of waiting for validation is one of the most subtle, yet most crippling habits people carry, especially those who were raised in a system where approval is everything. It doesn't shout at you. It doesn't tell you stop moving forward. Instead, it quietly whispers, wait until someone tells you you're ready. And because it feels responsible, we follow it without realizing that it's slowly draining our time, energy, and potential. From childhood, most of us are conditioned to see our progress through someone else's scoreboard. We're trained to measure our worth by grades, to believe certificates are proof of competence, to think promotions define our career value, and to treat social media likes as the modern-day gold star. Every step forward seems to require a stamp from an external authority, be it a teacher, a boss, an industry gatekeeper, or even friends and family. This is society's way of saying, you can go now. But here's the problem. If you've been programmed this way, you may never move until someone else hands you that green light. I know this trap all too well because I lived in it. I used to believe that success had a sequence of approvals. You do something, and then you wait. Wait for someone to notice. Wait for someone to praise. Wait for someone to let you in. That's why for years, even though I had ideas, skills, and the desire to do more, I stalled. Not because I was lazy, but because deep down I thought real action only counted if it came with public confirmation. But God's system is completely different from society's system. In the kingdom, you're not waiting to be equipped. You were already equipped before you even knew your calling. Look at how Genesis begins. Be fruitful and multiply. That's not just a command, it's an identity statement. It's saying this is what you are designed to do. Fruitfulness is not something you need permission to start. You were created to produce. You were born to expand. You were already given seeds, resources, and the authority to plant them. And when you compare God's system to the world's, the contrast is staggering. The world says, earn your way into the room. God says, you're already in the room. Start using what I gave you. The world says, wait until you're certified. God says, I've already qualified you. The world says, you need the right contacts to start. God says, I am your source, and I'll bring the right people when you move in obedience. Here's what I realized. The approval trap keeps people broke, stuck, and unseen, not because they lack talent, but because they're sitting on their talent. And the longer you wait for that imaginary green light, the more momentum you lose. You become like the servant in the parable of the talents who buried what was given to him. His problem wasn't that he lacked a gift. His problem was fear of acting without the master's physical presence. That's what happens when we put more faith in human approval than in divine assignment. We bury our gifts in safe places because we don't want to risk looking foolish without a cheer squad. But faith requires you to act without visible proof that it will work. God's pattern is to call you first, then equip you along the way, not to equip you fully so you'll feel safe to start. When I began rejecting the waiting mindset, I felt an internal shift. I stopped seeing myself as someone trying to earn a seat at the table and started seeing myself as someone already sent. And that's when doors opened. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I was finally using what I had. The approval I once chased began to show up naturally, not because I waited for it, but because my results spoke for themselves. This is why the trap of waiting for validation is so dangerous. It makes you believe that your value is unlocked by others, when in reality, your value is unlocked by action. You can pray for open doors all day, but if you're not turning the handle on the doors God already placed in front of you, nothing changes. The world will keep you in a holding pattern forever, but God's kingdom operates on a completely different timeline. Now. And here's the liberating truth. When you stop needing permission to live your calling, you step into a freedom most people never taste. You no longer need applause to create. You no longer need recognition to serve. You no longer need validation to produce fruit. You simply move because you were made to move. If you're stuck right now, it might not be because God hasn't given you the opportunity. It might be because you're still waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder. But the reality is, God already tapped you the moment He created you in His image. He already wrote your assignment in your DNA. The question is, will you step into it without waiting for the world to nod in approval? Because the moment you do, you'll discover something incredible. Your provision is tied to your obedience, not to your applause. Your breakthroughs are tied to your movement, not to your recognition. And your influence is tied to your faithfulness, not to your followers. Once you understand that, you stop living for green lights and start living for God's light. And that's when the trap finally breaks. There was a time in my life when I felt paralyzed, as if I couldn't take a single step forward until someone gave me a nod of approval. I thought I needed people to cheer me on, to clap for me, to recognize me before I could even start. It was almost like being frozen in place, waiting for permission that never came. But then I realized something that shook me deeply. Nobody was really watching. Everyone was too busy thinking about themselves, their problems, their bills, their own insecurities. And what I once thought was bad news, that no one was paying attention, turned out to be the greatest freedom I could ever have. When you stop waiting for someone to validate you, you start moving in a new way. I learned that my calling was not up for debate, not subject to a vote, not dependent on consensus. If Noah had asked his neighbor's opinion about building the ark, the project would have been laughed out of existence. But Noah built anyway. He didn't have an audience clapping for him. He didn't have a committee confirming his assignment. He only had a word from God. And that was enough. I had to learn the same lesson. I used to think results came after recognition, but in reality, recognition comes after results. The shift was messy. I didn't feel ready, I didn't feel polished, but I knew that starting, even imperfectly, was the only way forward. David didn't wait for Saul's armor to fit him. He didn't pause until the crowd believed in him. He picked up his sling, stepped out, and faced Goliath anyway. And it was that messy, unconventional action that opened the door to his destiny. I can tell you from experience, waiting for applause is a trap. If you measure your progress by claps and likes, you'll never move fast enough. Some of your greatest work will happen unseen. Jesus healed 10 lepers, but only one came back to say thank you. If he had waited for applause before healing, 9 lives would have missed the miracle. I realized that mission has to outweigh recognition. When you know why you're doing something, you don't stop when people ignore it. You keep going because it's obedience, not applause, that brings the breakthrough. I thought about Abraham too. He left his home without a map. He didn't wait for clarity or confirmation from a crowd. He moved, and as he moved, the path unfolded. That's how faith works. You don't wait for every detail to be guaranteed. You take the step, and provision shows up as you go. I started to apply that same faith in my own life. I stopped asking, will they like it, will they notice, and started asking, what did God tell me to do? That shift was everything. Once I began moving without permission, I noticed something remarkable. Results showed up faster. Opportunities opened up quicker. Not because people suddenly liked me more, but because fruit is louder than waiting. I realized that I was already equipped. The talents God placed in me were never meant to sit in the ground until someone applauded me. The parable of the talents shows us the master didn't stand over the servants, giving them step-by-step instructions. He left. He expected them to act. One buried the talent out of fear. The others multiplied theirs through action. Which one do you think I was acting like before? The one who buried. But the day I stopped waiting, I stopped burying. I started multiplying. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. Some days it looked like fumbling, like taking 5 steps forward and 3 steps back. But the difference was this. I was moving. And once you move, momentum shows up. It's like pushing a car stuck in the mud. You don't break free by waiting for the perfect push. You break free by pushing messy until the wheels catch. And once they catch, everything starts rolling faster. That's the beauty of acting without permission. You realize you don't need someone to crown you before you fight your giant. You don't need an audience before you build your ark. You don't need applause before you multiply your talent. You've already been equipped. You've already been called. The truth is, waiting feels safe, but it's actually what keeps you broke, stuck, and unseen. Society teaches us to wait. We're trained from school to chase grades, certificates, promotions, and likes. We grow up thinking someone else has to approve us before we're worthy to act. But God's system is different. He says you're already chosen, already called, already equipped. So when I look back, I see that every breakthrough came when I stopped waiting. Every door opened after I decided to walk forward without applause. Every fruit grew when I planted seeds, even when nobody noticed. And now I realize the question was never, will they approve? The real question was, will I move? And I'll tell you this. When you move without waiting, heaven backs you up. Provision comes, doors open, people are impacted. Fruit speaks louder than validation ever could. You don't need their permission, you already carry God's. The only thing left is your decision. I want you to picture this moment. The very instant you stop waiting for applause, permission, or validation from people, that's the same instant your breakthrough begins. It's not tomorrow, not when someone notices you, not when a committee claps for you. It's the moment you decide to move with what God already placed in your hand. I had to learn that lesson the hard way. For years, I thought I needed someone else to open the door for me, to hand me the opportunity, to say, now you're ready. But the truth is, no one was coming. And maybe for you it's the same. You're waiting for something that will never arrive, because heaven already gave you the green light. Think about Moses standing at the Red Sea. The Israelites were panicking, waiting for God to act. But God said, "Why are you crying out to me? Stretch out your staff." The miracle was not waiting on heaven, it was waiting on Moses to move with what he already had. That's the principle. The breakthrough doesn't come when you wait. It comes when you step. So I challenge you right now. What's in your hand? Maybe it's a small idea, maybe it's a skill, maybe it's a story. It doesn't look like much, but that's exactly what God uses. David had a sling, Noah had wood, the widow had a jar of oil, Jesus had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Breakthroughs don't start big. They start with what you already hold, multiplied by faith and obedience. The truth is, God's approval is more than enough to move. You don't need the whole world behind you when the creator of the universe is already for you. That's the kind of confidence that frees you from waiting for applause. That's the kind of faith that allows you to start, even when nobody notices. And here's the secret. Once you step out, fruit begins to grow. And fruit speaks louder than any validation ever could. So the question is not, will they notice me? The real question is, am I willing to move with what God already gave me? Because the moment you stop waiting, the moment you step forward in faith, is the very moment your breakthrough begins.